Peter Hitchens is renowned as a deeply conservative social and political commentator. Yet for 6 years as a young man, Peter was an active member of what became the Socialist Workers' Party. So what went wrong? Or maybe what went right? And I mean Peter Right with a capital R. How devoted were you to the Trotskyite revolutionary cause?
Oh, completely. It was my life, all my friendships, everything I did. It occupied every waking moment, and probably some of my sleeping ones as well. I really wanted to revolutionize, first of all, my own society and then the world. I thought that the world as it stood was wholly unsatisfactory, unfair, generally failing in its duty towards mankind, and I thought that it could be improved. It's a common delusion, and I suffered from it at full strength.
And your older brother Christopher was also a Trotskyite, though I think he later became identified as neoconservative. Were you at all influenced by him?
Oh, very much so, yes. There's no doubt that having an older brother in your life who embraces quite fervently strong, idealistic political opinions has an impact on you. I would be surprised by any younger brother who wasn't, and I certainly was.
And what's the idea, a revolution and violent if necessary?
Oh, violence, I think, was part of the process. I think we believed that violence would actually be good, that it was necessary to have a violent break with the past and with the existing system to purge ourselves and society of the wicked things which had become established. There's always been in revolutions a glorification of violence.
And what was your contribution, maybe violent as well, in practical terms to all this?
In practical terms, it was an awful lot of organisation. We believed in a very classically Leninist way that the future was going to be determined by a revolution of some kind which would be created by what we called the working class. And we set out to try and make contacts and friends and comrades among those members of the working class who would prepared to listen to us. I spent an awful lot of time in long conversations in pubs and elsewhere with dustmen, with coach workers in Scarborough, miners. I spent several weeks trying to recruit people at the Upper Clyde shipbuilders sit-in Clydebank must have been the early 70s as well. So we did actually make quite a lot of contact with them, and some of them took it very seriously. One of my most profound regrets is that I may have altered the lives of some entirely innocent and well-intentioned people for the worse.
And when did you begin to have what I suppose are called doubts? What caused you to abandon this all-consuming doctrinal passion?
The wonderful thing about being at university in the 70s was that we were completely insulated from reality. We were paid a grant, which I was quite easily able to live on for most of the time. We lived, in my case, in one of the plate glass universities at York, almost completely sequestered from real life in circumstances which at the time seemed rather ultra-modern. And now when I look back on it, it looks like a model for the world as it now is. And we were protected from reality. And then as soon as that came to an end and I had to go out and earn a living, and I began to earn a living very quickly as a newspaper reporter, I was forced into contact with the world whose existence I had previously kept from myself, and I was suddenly compelled to recognise that all kinds of people who I'd previously thought of as servants of a corrupt and doomed state, whether they were policemen or conservative councillors or firemen or bureaucrats of one kind or another, were actually perfectly normal human beings with good intentions. And so that eats away at your conviction that you're right and everybody else is wrong.
But were there any individual encounters that you had with, let's say, your fellow revolutionaries, any which suddenly made you think, hold on a minute, whatever I am, I can't quite be this?
Well, one sticks in my mind. We used to get people writing into the Socialist Worker, the IS paper, and asking for more information. And I would bicycle round near Swindon, where I was working on an evening newspaper, on evenings off, to contact these people. And one of them was extraordinarily physically gaunt. His wife, with whom he lived in a rather tumble-down house some way outside the town, was plainly terrified of him. And he began, during the evening's conversation, to rave in very worrying ways, particularly about assassinating the Queen. I later discovered that he did actually possess a firearm. And I was very worried by this. I thought if we're attracting people like this, then there must be something seriously wrong with us. At the same time, I was reading a book by Arthur Koestler, not one of the famous ones, one called Arrival and Departure, which is actually about the problems of world reformers and how most of them want to reform the world because they've got something wrong with them. This seemed to me to be more or less accurate. And it plunged me into a train of thought from which I emerged a couple of years later thinking, I've had enough of this, it doesn't really work. And I actually did what most revolutionaries don't do. I formally resigned.
How did that affect your relationships with people who must have been your friends?
I think as word got out that I'd quit, they generally cut me off. In fact, I was in a very awkward position a few years afterwards over some of them when I was working on another paper in another town who were up to no good, and my then editor tried to get me to expose them, and I would have been quite happy to expose them, except that they were people I knew. And I felt this would be a personal betrayal, and I didn't. But they didn't take the same attitude towards me. They thought I was a four-letter man anyway, and they wouldn't have anything to do with me. And increasingly, people who I'd previously got on with and been on good terms with turned away. But it wasn't wholly sudden, because also what I did was I turned away from that whole milieu and from all the cultural and moral things which they had embraced, and I became a stranger to them and they to me. And so most people, I think, make most of their friends during their university years and shortly afterwards, and that's when I was busy losing most of mine.
So you left the revolutionary movement and you became a Labour Party member, which you then subsequently left. So what was all that about?
Once you've had a worldview, you miss it if it's gone. You need something. You need to sustain yourself with some sort of idea of what it is you desire the world to be, because that's what you have by then become. And so I looked around for something which seemed to me to be intelligent, thoughtful, very much, again, inspired by the Arthur Koestler idea that one could come out of totalitarian movements and move into political movements which were reformist, but which didn't threaten liberty. And the Labour Party seemed to be the thing. What I hadn't realised was just quite what the Hampstead Labour Party of the late 1970s was like.
That was the branch you were...
That was the one I joined, yes. I used to get called to order during meetings of the General Management Committee, onto which I got elected by Trotskyist methods, actually. I used to get called to order by the chairman. Comrade Hitchens, she would shout, "You are infuriating the other comrades." I was speaking, they were interrupting me. I would be the one being called to order because I was saying things such as, actually, a nuclear deterrent isn't a terribly bad idea. And a constitutional monarchy is a pretty good arrangement, and also that I didn't like the Irish Republican Army, which was a particularly unpopular sentiment in large parts of North London Labour at the time.
So then, later, you joined the Conservative Party and left them as well.
Well, yes,
which makes me think
forlorn enterprise.
It's nothing good enough for Peter Hitchens.
Probably not, but why should it be? No, the thing about joining the Conservative Party, because I felt after the arrival of the awful Blairite era, there had to be a resistance that was democratic. All kinds of stupid things like fuel protests and so on. And I had developed, as an ex-Leninist, a very strong aversion to extra-constitutional politics. And I thought that if you were going to responsibly oppose something which you thought to be bad, the only way to do it was through constitutional democratic politics. And the Conservative Party seemed at the time to be the way of doing it. I very rapidly found out it was an utterly empty vessel. There is no politics in the Conservative Party.
There never has been, Peter.
Well, I know that now. You can understand why it was terra incognita for me at the time. I didn't know. I had to do my own exploring and make my own mistakes. This
trajectory through various political forces, was it a single journey or a number of disconnected steps?
I don't really like this journey thing, do you? It was a development, it was a process of growing up, and it wasn't any kind of straight line. Things would come and go, but it was formed partly by my own character, which is self-righteous, puritanical, and filled with the joys of telling other people what to do, and partly from the experiences which I had as a result of being that kind of person. I bump into things more than other people do, because if you live your life in a sort of aggressive and assertive way, then you do. And I did.
And how much did becoming religious affect those changes in your political outlook?
I think it was much more that returning to the faith of my childhood was a recognition that I had completed a process and now must grow up and be properly adult. And I felt this was the way in which I could confirm that. And it was a conscious decision, slowly taken over a long time. No trance, no swoon, no vision, but a rational decision, and particularly taken to choose, as I say, the religion of my childhood, the Church of England, because I'd seen enough of former revolutionaries picking what one might call the more dogmatic faiths. And I didn't want there to be anybody saying, oh, well, this is just another version of Trotskyism. Nobody could confuse the Church of England with Trotskyism. I just don't think it's possible, even now.
So you don't see it as exchanging one sort of belief in what might constitute perfection for another?
Yes, I do, and a very different belief in that my kingdom is not of this world, that I recognise that justice and all the other things which we seek are not available in this life. They only exist in eternity and can only be striven for in eternity, and to imagine that you can achieve them in this life is actually a heretical mistake and leads to all kinds of dreadful things. I've often said utopia can only ever be approached across a sea of blood, and you never get there.
The former New Statesman editor, Tony Howard, said he could recall you as a young man passing out copies of The Socialist Worker, and he wrote, "It is merely his convictions that have changed, not the fervour and fanaticism with which they continue to be held." Was that a fair comment?
No, it was a perfectly good, well-turned phrase, and I enjoyed reading it, but it's not actually accurate. I think that what I do and think now are wholly different, both in content and character and indeed appearance from what I did then. Apart from anything else, I don't claim to know what I believe. I rely entirely on faith. I don't have any desire whatever to silence anybody who disagrees with me, and I loathe political violence.
Notwithstanding the change in purely political terms, do you think there's a commonality of tone in the way you express yourself when you were this ardent revolutionary socialist and now you're a kind of redoubtable reactionary? That the Hitchens tone is the same, even if the cause is completely different?
No. The tone of the revolutionary is different. The tone of the revolutionary is suffused with a homicidal intolerance, which I no longer feel, and with the self-belief which I no longer have the confidence to hold. We did make jokes, though they were crueler jokes, when I was on the revolutionary left, but I hope I make more jokes now than I made then, just for instance.
And how have the people you used to know reacted along the years to your changes of opinion or political allegiance?
Well, some of them won't talk to me. Some of them find it quite funny. One or two I've maintained contact with. Some have stayed more or less at my side throughout the whole thing.
Including your wife?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to those others who are beginning to feel uncertain about their own views and are contemplating whether they need some fundamental change of mind or action?
Follow it. Never be afraid of any discovery of the truth. What most of us do most of the time, and I've done it myself so I know, is we can see ahead a few moves, the chess game of thought, and we don't like the look of it. So we don't make the next move. We turn away from it. We get angry with people who disagree with us rather than listening to what they say. Don't do any of that. Listen to what they say, follow it, never ever deny what you are discovering to be the truth. It's much better than sitting in a prison of the mind that you made for yourself. It shuts you off from thought and discovery and ultimately from truth.
And what would the young Pete Hitchens think of the man you've become?
Oh, I expect he would despise him, but that's the job of the young, isn't it, to despise people who are older than them. That doesn't worry me, because luckily enough I've had long enough life to discover how wrong I was and to find my old self instructive. I don't regret having done any of this, because it's by doing it I think I've gone deeper into the matter than I ever would have done if I hadn't. But on the other hand, we do have to be able to laugh quite heartily at what we used to be.
And if one of your children, I believe you have 3 children, if one of them wanted to join a revolutionary socialist group, would you encourage them or discourage them?
I don't think I'd do either, actually. I suppose the cynic would encourage in the hope that his encouragement would put them off. The fool would discourage in the belief that it would make any difference. I think I'd just let them get on with it.
Peter Hitchens, thank you very much.
Why I Changed My Mind was presented by Dominic Lawson and produced by Martin Rosenbaum.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.